The Caribbean sun beat down on Tortuga, a relentless hammer of heat and humidity. At the docks, amidst the raucous clamor of a dozen languages and the scent of salt rum and stale sweat, Captain Red Thorn of the Crimson Tide watched the world with a weary eye. He was a man forged by betrayal and the sea, his face tanned and lined, his red hair tied back from a gaze that held the coldness of deep water. His crew, a mix of weathered buccaneers, laughed and drank ashore, celebrating a successful raid on a Spanish galleon. The hold was full of coin and silks, but Thorn felt no joy, only the familiar empty ache of a life lived for plunder, and nothing more. His first mate Finn, a loyal man with a hearty laugh, approached him. "Captain, a gift has arrived from Governor Dubois. Says it's a token of gratitude. Some twisted joke, no doubt." A scowl tightened Thorn's features. Governor Dubois was a man he despised, a cruel, opulent politician who ruled from his grand plantation on the mainland. Thorn had clashed with his patrols before. He waved a dismissive hand. "Tell him I have no need for his poisoned gifts. Throw it back into the sea where it belongs." "It's not a thing, Captain," Finn said, his voice lower. "It's a person, a woman. She's shackled, and she's been through hell." Thorn's jaw clenched. He hated the business of slavery, a brutal trade that stained every port. He walked down the gangplank, his boots thudding against the wood, and his crew fell silent. There, on the dock, kneeling in the dirt, was a young woman. Her clothes were rags, caked with mud and dust, her hair a matted mess. Her wrists were raw where the iron shackles had bitten deep. The men who brought her, Dubois' guards, judging by their uniforms, snickered behind her. The joke was clear. A broken, worthless thing for the infamous pirate captain. A cold rage, sharp as a cutlass, sliced through Thorn's indifference. He looked at her, and his fury was replaced by a strange, quiet stillness. Her head was bowed, hiding her face, but a single ray of sunlight found a lock of her hair, not the color of the sun-bleached world around them, but a deep, earthy brown. And then, as if sensing his stare, she slowly raised her head. He froze. The world went silent, the noise of the docks fading into a distant hum. Her face was gaunt, streaked with dirt and exhaustion, but her eyes, they were the eyes he had seen in every dream, every quiet moment of solitude. The color of a stormy sea, wide with a fear he recognized as a ghost of his own past. He took a hesitant step forward, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. "Ilara," he whispered, the name a rusty sound on his tongue. He had not spoken it in 10 years. Her eyes, full of dread and disbelief, widened. A single tear cut a clean line through the grime on her cheek. She tried to speak, but only a choked sob escaped. Thorn's gaze went from her face to the raw marks on her wrists, to the torn fabric of her dress. The man who had been a pirate for a decade, who had seen and committed unspeakable violence, felt his knees go weak. This was not a gift. This was a soul-crushing lie, and a painful, undeniable truth. He was looking at a ghost, and the sight of her brokenness shattered the walls he had spent a lifetime building. Below deck, the air was heavy with the scent of salt and oil lamps. The crew had been ordered to leave the two of them alone, and a respectful silence had fallen over the ship. Ilara, now wrapped in a clean blanket, sat on a wooden chest, her body still trembling. Thorn, pacing the small cabin, felt a storm of emotions he hadn't faced since he'd been a boy. "I don't understand," he said, his voice raw. "They told me you were dead, that you died of a fever a month after I left." Ilara's voice was a frail whisper. "It was a lie, a convenient lie. They needed me to marry. My family. They lost everything. The only way to save them from ruin was to be betrothed to Governor Dubois. When you vanished, it was easy for them to say you were a casualty of the sea, and for him to claim me as his. The truth was more brutal than any bullet. He had left her, a blacksmith's son with a stolen ring and a promise of a future, a fool who believed he could make his fortune and return. But he had been caught, beaten, and left for dead by Dubois's guards. When he had recovered and learned she was gone, he had assumed the worst, that she had found comfort in the arms of a richer man. That betrayal had been the fuel for his transformation into Captain Thorn, a man who took what he wanted because he believed he had lost everything that mattered. He was a monster, Ilara continued, her voice gaining a hint of strength. He saw me as a trophy, a means to a greater fortune. When I refused him, when I tried to escape, he had me sold as a slave. He wanted to break me, to make me a servant in my own home before he sent me away. He said my spirit was too strong, that I was a fickle mare who needed to be tamed. Thorn stopped pacing and knelt before her, taking her hands. The calluses of his pirate's life were a stark contrast to her scarred, thin hands. "He'll pay," Thorn said, the promise a low, dangerous rumble. "He'll pay for every lash, every tear." A few hours later, in the mess hall, Thorn laid out his plan to his crew. The atmosphere was tense. "We raid Dubois' plantation," he announced. "We take every last thing he owns, and we free every slave he holds captive. We destroy his reputation, his power, and we leave him with nothing but the dust he so graciously fed to her." Finn stepped forward, his expression serious. "Captain, a man like Dubois is not to be trifled with. His estate is a fortress. We could all die." "This isn't about coin, Finn," Thorn said, his voice flat. "This is about justice. This is about taking back what was stolen from me, from us. She is the reason I became this man, and now she is the reason I will become something better." His words carried a weight they had not heard before. They looked at Ilara, who stood behind him, her gaze fixed on the crew. They saw not a slave, but a lady, a woman of pride and resilience. The crew, hardened by years of piracy, saw in her eyes the same pain and defiance that had driven Thorn. Slowly, a few men nodded, then a few more. One by one, they pledged their support. The plan was set. They would sail to the mainland, use a captured scout to learn the patrol routes, and strike at night. Under the cover of a storm they were confident would arrive with the changing tides. They were no longer just pirates. They were a force of vengeance, guided by a past they thought was buried forever. The night arrived with a vengeance. A churning wall of wind and rain swept in from the sea, a furious, cleansing force that was the perfect cover. The crimson tide anchored in a secluded cove, the ropes groaning against the strain, and the crew, armed and determined, navigated the treacherous, mud-slicked path toward Governor Dubois' plantation. Thorn led the way, his heart a relentless drum against the storm's fury. He saw no gold, no jewels, only the faces of the men he would free and the face of the woman he had to save. Every drop of rain felt like an old wound being washed clean, a physical manifestation of his decade-long torment finally finding purpose. They scaled the 10-foot stone walls, silent as shadows. The rain turned the dirt to a thick, sucking paste, and the wind howled, drowning out the occasional sounds of combat, the muffled thud of a falling guard, the sharp crack of a pistol's butt. Ilara, her bare feet finding purchase on the familiar rough ground of her former prison, was no damsel in distress. She was a soldier, her eyes burning with a calm fury. She pointed to a set of buildings. "The armory is there, and the slave quarters are behind the kitchens. We can cut through the servants' passage." "The master's study is here," she whispered, pointing to a large, separate stone building. "That's where he keeps his ledger and his records. He is a meticulous man." Thorn nodded, a grim smile on his face. The ledger would contain the irrefutable proof of her stolen inheritance and the names of the families who had suffered under Dubois' cruelty. While Finn and a small team moved with the precision of ghosts to free the slaves, Thorn and 2 others stormed the study. The heavy mahogany door burst inward, splintering the lock. Inside, Governor Dubois, a portly man with a face full of arrogance and cruelty, sat at his desk, startled and infuriated by the sight of the soaked, mud-streaked Thorn standing before him. "You!" Dubois shrieked, scrambling to his feet, knocking over his chair. "How dare you trespass on my land, you filthy pirate! I'll have your head mounted on a pike for this." "You sent me a gift, Governor," Thorn said, his voice low and dangerous, dripping with the menace of the storm itself. "I've come to repay the favor." The fight was swift and brutal. Dubois' guards, roused from their slumber, were no match for the seasoned pirates. Thorn cornered the governor against a bookshelf, the point of his cutlass at the man's quivering throat. Dubois trembled, not with fear, but with a petty rage that consumed him. "You can't have her," Dubois spat, a venomous whisper. "She is a slave, a whore. She belongs to me. I bought her." "She never belonged to anyone but herself," Thorn said, his eyes hard as flint. "And she certainly never belonged to a pathetic, craven coward like you." With a swift, final motion, he disarmed the man with a precise flick of his blade, knocking him to the floor. "She's free, and so are the people you so mercilessly enslaved." They found the ledger and the signed deeds to Elara's family's land, hidden in a false bottom of a chest. As they returned to the main house, they were met by a joyous chaos. The freed slaves, their faces a mix of terror and hope, streamed out into the rain-swept yard. Finn helped them load what little they had onto a stolen wagon, their quiet determination speaking louder than any cheer. Elara, her face streaked with a mixture of rain and tears of relief, met Thorn in the courtyard. The rain sluiced the grime from her face, revealing the beauty he had never forgotten. He held out his hand, palm up, an offer of partnership and a silent question, and for the first time in a decade he saw her smile. Not a glimmer of a smile, but a full, joyful, tearful curve of her lips that lit up the storm-darkened night. She took his hand, her fingers warm and strong, and he felt a current of belonging he had not known since he was a boy. The Crimson Tide sailed at dawn, its decks no longer just filled with the crew, but with the faces of the men, women, and children they had freed. They stood on the deck, side by side, bathed in the gentle golden light of a new day. He was no longer just a pirate, but a man who had reclaimed his purpose, his dignity, and she was no longer a slave, but a woman who had found her freedom and her heart. The horizon was bright and new, a promise of a future built not on plunder and revenge, but on redemption and love. This is the story of how a single soul changed a pirate's course forever. If you were moved by Red and Elara's journey, don't let their story end here. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell to join us for our next adventure. What do you think lies ahead for the Crimson Tide? Let us know in the comments below.